one of the things we've been talking about recently amongst ourselves is trying to make a stable, long-lasting foam with low concentrations of either STS or polydocanol. And I was going to
Yeah.
ask you a couple of quick questions about that.
Hmm.
Um, how often do you find yourself using, say, zero point 0.1 STS or zero point 0.2 polydocanol foam when you're treating patients, and what sort of situations do you find yourself using it in?
Yeah. Okay. So for a good while, I was flipping and changing, and certainly I used to use foam or try to use foam with STS quite often, and I would use them generally for reticular veins. So the feeding reticular vein, if I could identify it and get a butterfly into it, then actually my approach would be to use foam. I started off using STS, and actually at that stage, STS, if you're using zero point 0.2 or zero point 0.1 STS, I used to use a female to female and a filter, and actually STS, you can create a foam that way, and I was creating a foam that way. The problem then suddenly arose when I started thinking about the potential availability of the low dose STS. And I actually made a mental note about a year ago or so. I switched to polydocanol, and the first thing I suddenly noticed was actually if you're using polydocanol at the lower strengths, i.e. 5 or even zero point 0.5, using a female to female and a filter, I felt it I just couldn't get it to foam adequately. It foamed it just it didn't create a foam, and I was very dissatisfied with what was happening. Now I'm still using a combination of both, although given the fact that I now dilute everything, I'm minded to go back to using STS for everything. But also the thing that changed in my practice is, although I would still try and foam reticular veins preferentially with a low dose foam, be it polydocanol or STS, I've actually now switched to using Varixio's system. And the moment I purchased or acquired a Varixio machine, I suddenly creating foam with low dose polydocanol suddenly didn't become an issue. It creates what appears to be an adequate and stable enough foam to be able to inject reticular veins. The telangiectasia, I still preferentially would use liquid on almost every occasion. And I use liquid on every occasion, not that I don't think that foam works, but actually when I'm trying to inject small uh, telangiectasia, the issue comes with the first time you put the needle in, there's not an issue. But thereafterwards, you always get this little, what I'd describe as a terminal dribble of foam that actually then obscures your view for the next puncture. And so from my perspective, and no matter what I do, or sort of trying to pull back a little bit on the syringe, etc. But it's almost like it's like a little child with a dribbling nose, and you're just like a mom who wants to wipe it all the time. It's a case of, no matter what happens, I cannot get a clear view from the second and third injection point if I'm using foam for telangiectasia. So actually, I now preferentially would always use a low dose, be it polydocanol or STS, but I'd use a low dose liquid for the telangiectasia. But I preferentially use foam for the reticular veins, and as a general rule, will always try and get a small, 25, 27 gauge butterfly into the reticular vein and then inject the reticular veins with foam.
Yeah, I think your experience kind of echoes my own. I think, well, I'm obsessed with syringe choice and using a good quality low silicon syringe when you're making foam for any application, but it's particularly important with the low strengths. Fine training telangiectasia, and I see a particular vein in the area of feeding it. I will always try and put a low dose of foam in that. In the past, I found that the green BDM syringes would make a decent enough foam with zero point 0.1 STS, but even Turimos or any of the black syringes did not. Um, but I wonder if you were going to drop the V word that you did. like Euvorexia, I find makes a very stable foam.
Yeah,
But with the lower strengths, I put a bit more than the 2 mils of solution in. I put 3 or maybe 4 mils, just to get a slightly wetter, heavier foam. And that seems to work incredibly well in treating telangiectasia.
yeah. No, I think yes. I don't. I I haven't increased the liquid as yet, but it's something I may take on board. But the one thing, as I said, the game changer was suddenly, especially when I switched to polydocanol. If you're using polydocanol down at 0.25, zero point 0.5, it is extremely, I found it extremely difficult to foam. All you got was this froth, and it was sort of it was just very dissatisfying. But actually, almost in a way, there was a sudden leap in my heart when I opened up a Vrixia machine, put in low dose polydocanol, and actually it returned something that actually stayed as a foam in the syringe long enough for me to get it down a few butterflies and actually see a result.